we find that the Tochacha in the end of the Sefer Dvorim, Deuteronomy, speaks about the curses. Hashem says, Anochi haster aster planai. When you fail, I will go into concealment. And when I go into concealment, I will conceal my face. You will not recognize this world as I have any relevance in this world. There used to be an expression, it's like the Wild West. No rhyme, no reason, no law and order. It's survival of the fittest. Evil rules reign supreme. And you say, how could it be? If God created the world for the sake of good, has God allowed this to happen? At the time of the Holocaust, people asked that question. Where's God? God forbid. But that's only a consequence of multiple areas of transgression, areas that were breached, which are the underpinnings of existence. I'll give you an example. Years ago, they used to have the tower, used to show pictures of the Tower of Pisa. It was on a tilt. But as years went on, it tilted more and more. I'm not sure exactly where it's today. It was almost like on a diagonal. I think they had to shore it up, otherwise it would have fallen over totally. Could you imagine you have a secure base to a tree and you keep hacking away at the base of the tree with an axe? Over time, that tree starts tilting. God created this world with phenomenal supports. We read in Pirkei Avos, the world stands on three principles. Torah, Avoda, Gemilas Chasodim, study of Torah, service of God, and acts of loving kindness. Also, the world stands on truth, din, judgment, justice. These are integral, these are the underpinnings of existence. What happens if every one of these principles are pulled out? And this is the underpinning of existence. These are the supporting columns that hold the world up. What happens? The world starts faltering. Could you imagine if the world would tilt and the ocean would tip over and the ocean would go into the area which man lives, where mankind are? Everything would be destroyed. But that happens. When does the world tilt? When you start removing the underpinnings, the supports for existence, which is acts of spirituality, which generate that empowerment. It keeps shoring up the base. But if you don't shore up the base continuously, it erodes. And with that erosion is called God goes into concealment. And he allows evil to reign supreme. So why doesn't God allow the world to be destroyed? Really, according to justice, the world should be destroyed. And he's destroyed the world at the time of the great flood. The world was destroyed. If Noah himself wouldn't have any degree of merit, the world would have come to an end. Because Torah goes out of its way to say, why did Noah survive the great flood? Because he found special favor with God. That was his saving grace. But if not for that, existence would have lost its value. The world would have ended. So because he found favor with God, but is that enough reason to allow there should be a future? The answer is yes. Because the objective of creation is not to destroy it. If there's any degree of saving grace, and ultimately the world could come back, God wants it to come back. And that's up to man's choice. So based on the laws of justice, the world should have been destroyed. The system failed. But God being the basis for everything, he displays his reality that he's the dominant figure in figurative terms. He's the source, and he wills existence despite that. And ultimately, in retrospect, when he will reign in on this existence, then you'll see who he is. Then you'll see justice ultimately being executed and delivered. The Holocaust was a display of that. The most devout, the most righteous, innocent children, because they were Jewish, they were annihilated. Stalin, his era, Stalin, I think in his time, I don't know how many millions and millions of people he killed. That was his evil. And what is communism? It's denying that God exists. And they got away with it for 70 years. For 70 years, they got away with it and they created their own vacuum. God doesn't exist here. There was no trace of God in communist Russia. It was going from bad to worse. Why? The Chofetz Chaim writes something very interesting. At the time of the Russian Revolution, there was a certain arm of the Communist Party. It was called the Yevsetska. I just have to stop for a moment. I have to take this call, very important call. The arm of the Communist Party was called the Yevsetska. It was comprised of Jews. And these Jews who are communists, who are committed to communism with a passion, they were going to eradicate any trace of God's presence in its existence. And their responsibility was to destroy, eradicate, seek out any rabbi, any yeshiva student, any synagogue, any remnant or vestige of God. They're responsible to destroy. That they were known as the Yevsetska. They hunted rabbis. They hunted yeshiva students. They burned books. And if you were caught with a book, a Jewish book, even to a primer, you went to Siberia. They sent you to the Gulag. You didn't survive. What do you think ultimately they did with the Yevsetska? After they used them to destroy the rabbis and the yeshiva students, because they were Jewish, they destroyed them. Just as in the ghettos, if you read about what went on during World War II, the ghettos, they were police, they're called Jewish police. And they did the bidding of the Nazis, that the Jews in the ghettos would abide by all the decrees of the Nazis. And they treated the Jews with a level of cruelty, these Jews, because they believed by following the wishes of the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, they would be spared. And they treated them well. During this period, they treated these people well. Ultimately, when they liquidated the ghettos, these people were liquidated with the rest of them. They had a thing called Judenrat. The Judenrat was an agency which oversaw the function of the Jews in the ghetto. And under the auspices of Judenrat, you had Jewish police. You had kapos, Yimach Shemam Zichram. The kapos were Jews in the concentration camps, which were treated specially, and they had a level of cruelty. They treated their brothers and sisters worse than the Nazis. And if a Jew would actually cross a line or a nuance of something which didn't live up to their expectation, they would have them tortured. They'd give them over to be beaten. These were the kapos. They were Jews. It's unheard of. A Jew treating another Jew this way, it's unheard of. Where's God? Innocent men, women being marched into gas chambers. Mothers with daughters, with young children, and those pellets of the cyanide or whatever that was called, the poison gas. And the moment it filtered into this chamber, everybody died. They were poisoned. Then they put them into the gas chamber, into the crematorium. And they took their bodies and they turned into soap. Could you imagine? They were barbarians. And they had soap. And God's watching this as if nothing's happening. God, Moshe says, the Jews are God's children, beloved children. Could you imagine? God allows this to take place. His children to be murdered with the level of cruelty, which is demonic. And even after they're dead, they take their remains and turn them into soap. Could you imagine? And God is watching this. How? There's no judge, there's no judgment. The world is functioning as if there's no God. God says, when evil rears its head, I will go into concealment. And he cited a verse. The times with God is like he's sleeping, God forbid. He's not sleeping. But he has to allow evil to run its course up to a point. The world really, God, at that point, she pulled the plug on existence. But since ultimately there is a value that the Jews are going to come back and the handful of people are going to come back, God allows it to happen. Because that's the only way he could satisfy, as I said, the evil has to run its course. Eventually, if it ran its course the way it should, based on justice, he would destroy the world. So why does the world exist? It's his chesed. It's his kindness. But even with kindness, there has to be an objective. And ultimately, we're going to come to some conclusion where that it has value. If it has no value, there's no kindness to support evil. It's very interesting. Every dark cloud, very often there's a silver lining. Many miracles happened during the Holocaust. 6 million Jews may have been murdered. But the core of Judaism, which were the Torah scholars of Europe, are very significant. Number-wise, they're small numbers compared to what was destroyed. The core that was able to regenerate the Torah we have today, which is the hundreds of thousands throughout the world, people studying Torah, and which are observant Jews, was due to this relatively handful of Jews who miraculously were able to escape from the clutches of the Nazis. There was a yeshiva in Europe, it was called Mir Yeshiva. There was a small town in Poland called Mir, like the Mir space station, Mir. And they were able to escape from Vilna on the Trans-Siberian Express to Vladivostok, which is Siberia, to Kobe, Japan, to Shanghai, China. And they spent 4 years in China, Shanghai. And they had community yeshiva students, maybe about 600-700. And the core of those students were the highest caliber of scholarship in Torah. And the one who oversaw them was a man who was a very holy man. And they were mentored in this spiritual cocoon. There was no material. They lived on barely anything. My mashgiach, who was a very special, holy tzaddik, great Torah sage, he said that after the war, all he ate there, they had rice. And the rice, they had to pick the insects out of the rice before they were able to eat it. It was infested. After the war, he couldn't look at rice. But that was their staple. That's all they ate. Rice and bread. Maybe they had some vegetable, nothing basically. They lived at a level of impoverishment And also the summers where the humidity was unbearable. It's a miracle they didn't die of dehydration. But that's what they experienced, this excruciating setting for 4 years. And the Torah scholarship went, they learned day and night, despite all this. After the war, this group of people, either they went to Israel or they came to the United States. And they were the core of the dissemination of Torah in America. And Judaism was put on another level. Pre-World War II, it was literally relatively backward. After World War II, we saw it to another level. Standards were different standards. The Hasidic rabbis came from Europe and they established the Hasidic communities. Before World War II, there were no Hasidic communities in America. All the dynasties were replanted here in America and in Israel. Jews pre-World War II didn't have beards. You didn't see a person walking with a beard. The whole concept of a woman covering her hair almost didn't exist. It had to become a holy Rebbitzin, a wife of a special rabbi, observant people. Observance was really through rote. It wasn't through being learned. It was tradition. People behaved traditionally. What they believed was correct. Like when we grew up, what was kosher in the 50s? You read the ingredients. It said pure vegetable shortening. You thought that was kosher. It didn't say lard in the ingredient. That was kosher. It was far from kosher. There were so many things we weren't aware of in the manufacturing that the plants, the vessels, everything, they manufactured other things. And there were certain ingredients weren't listed, but it said pure vegetable shortening, that's kosher. Later did we learn and understand when the OU launched their certification organization, with the head of his name was Rabbi Rosenberg, who had a doctorate in chemistry. He understood, he did his investigation, and he set the standard of what kosher is not kosher. That was the beginning of the OU certification. Then the Hasidic rabbis, they set up their standard of kosher, which was even more meticulous to meet other standards. Took on a whole different reality. But these were the remnants. These were the embers of the fires of Europe, where these people lost their families, lost their children, lost their wives, lost their communities. Poland was a wasteland. Warsaw had 2.5 million Jews. After the war, there were no Jews. It was Judenrein. They called it Judenrein. The Nazis wanted Europe to be Judenrein. They wanted the world to be Judenrein, cleansed of Jews. Could you imagine Park Avenue or Times Square? You know, New Year's Eve night, you have 1 million people there watching that ball drop. Fast forward a week later, you don't see one human being in Times Square. It's like shocking. I'm just giving it the comparison. 2.5 million Jews in Warsaw. After the Warsaw Ghetto was destroyed, there was maybe a handful of Jews in hiding. No Jew walked the streets. There was no Jews. They deported all the Jews to the concentration camps. They murdered the majority of those Jews. If they didn't flee before the Warsaw Ghetto was shut down, or they had papers, false papers that they were Gentiles. Otherwise, there was no survival. But how does God allow this? This is evil. The times God goes into concealment. Because if good is not funded and fueled, evil thrives and gets the upper hand. And it was up to evil, he would destroy everything. But if that would happen, God would have to destroy the world, because then the world has no value. I'll give you an example. Years ago, when they founded the state of Israel in 1948, they said that the strip of land Israel was, this is before the 6-Day War, was the equivalent of Rhode Island. That's what they compared it to. It's no wider than Rhode Island and no longer than Rhode Island. After the 6-Day War, they took territories, the West Bank, it expanded. You know, how many Jews do you think were in Israel in 48? When the UN recognized Israel to be a state, do you know what happened? Every Arab army, we're talking about hundreds of millions of Arabs surrounded. They attacked Israel. That's what happened. We didn't have any sophisticated air force. Literally, we're talking about a ragtag army there. And somehow, surrounded by hundreds of millions of Arabs, and we're talking about a handful of people. And they were able to somehow fight them off. How? How's it possible? And the Arabs couldn't care about world opinion. As today, they don't care about the world opinion. How does it happen? You know what the answer is? It's called miracle. It's a miracle for what happened. They tell over stories. The Arabs thought this, they thought that, they thought we had this, they thought we had that. We didn't have anything. But God caused, in their minds, they believed we had certain things which we didn't have. And therefore, they backed down. There were many casualties in those years. It was a fledgling state. So evil wants to devour us. But if they devour us, there's no Jews. And if the world stands by and allows it to happen, what's the culpability of the world? The world during World War II, they claimed they didn't know what was going on. They didn't know. They knew what was going on. The average citizen in the United States didn't know what was going on. But the American government, Roosevelt, FDR knew what was going on. And it was known, it was a claim against them. They were killing in a year, Hungarian Jewry, in 1 year, 900,000 Jews were murdered in 1 year. Eichmann, Yamach Shmo B'Zichro, was in charge of transporting the Jews from Hungary to Auschwitz. 900,000 Jews were murdered in that year. How did they do it? They had the trains transporting these cattle cars packed with Jews, and the killing machine was 10,000 Jews a week were being murdered. Plus, on the way, other Jews were being murdered. Roosevelt knew about this. They pleaded with him. Let them just bomb the tracks. If they bomb the tracks to Auschwitz, these cattle cars can't transport Jews. You could save hundreds of thousands of Jews. You know what Roosevelt said? Can't be bothered. Can't be bothered. They're aware of it, can't be bothered. It's unconscionable. Now, you know, certain things were revealed, things in the time of Chamberlain in England. They had a very good spy system. They knew exactly what was going on in Europe. Like the CIA in England. And up to a point, Churchill knew. After a while, Churchill said, we don't want the reports coming in any longer. We can't be busy with it. We can't be bothered with it. Could you imagine? Millions of Jews being killed, being murdered, can't be bothered with it. The average person wasn't aware of what the governments were aware of. We're not saying Europe wasn't anti-Semitic. England was always anti-Semitic. But to that degree that if they would have known, would have they been able to remain silent? Not sure. But how? How does God allow this? This is evil rearing its head. God says, I will go into concealment. It's as if I don't see anything. However, ultimately, when I come out of concealment, there's going to be reckoning. We haven't seen the reckoning. You know, we had the Nuremberg trials after the war. The Nazis, the ones who actually ran or oversaw or controlled this killing machine, they were killed. How many were killed? Most of them fled. Most of them went to hiding. Many governments were involved in transporting to South America. The church was involved, the Catholic Church. How many children were put into monasteries and convents by the parents. And afterwards, after the war, when they went back, they couldn't regain their children, the survivors. Of course, they somehow transfer them from convent to convent, from monastery to monastery to hide these children. And they were never found, many of them. And ultimately, they assimilated and lived as Christians and believed they were Christians because they were put there when they were literally almost infants by the parents, before the parents were killed, sent off to the camps. But how does God remain silent? This is evil. And God allows it. When the Jews fail to a certain degree, and evil reaches a certain level of existence, everything just falls apart. It explodes. And it has to be satisfied. And after it's run its course, God says, now I intervene. There's reckoning. But what kind of reckoning was there? Do you know how many Jews became not observant because of the Holocaust? Do you know how many Jews became atheists because of the Holocaust? It was the ultimate desecration of God's name. So even though the war came to an end, we still have the wounds. We're terminally set back, almost never to recover until the coming Mashiach from the scars of the Holocaust. Scars, spiritual scars, not talking about physical scars. Physically, materially, we came back. There's almost no memory of that. Well, they have to go to the camps to take the kids to see what was. And even there, it's not so simple. Many stories recently about anti-Semitism at Auschwitz, with the ones who oversee the museum and everything, they treat the Jews almost like the Nazis treated the Jews. They wouldn't give them entry. But again, evil is starting to rear its head. What's going on in the United States? The increase in anti-Semitism just in the past year. It's multiples of what it was in previous years. What's happening? What about law and order? What about integrity? What about decency? What about conscience? When it's time for evil to rear its head, it all means nothing. Nothing means nothing. And that's what we're experiencing today. But the light is at the end of the tunnel. We're not far from it, because God will only tolerate up to a point. God forbid we shouldn't experience another Holocaust, which we will not. They say if World War III would happen, it'll last for, according to the Vilna Gaon, it's supposed to last for a few minutes. That's it. Whatever's going to happen, it's going to be catastrophic for a few moments. Mashiach comes immediately. Messiah will come. That's the Vilna Gaon. But we know what we have to do. Understanding and appreciating it, as we say. If a person himself is dying and you have a weight, you could hook yourself onto life support, and you don't, what are you, a fool? The only life support we have is to infuse ourselves with the spiritual life source, which is Torah and doing the mitzvahs, the commands, God's commandments. There's nothing else. The world is out of control. Out of control. With all the money you have, you can't control society. You can't control world opinion. You can't protect yourself. God forbid. What happened not long ago, 2 years ago? They burnt down Manhattan, uptown Manhattan, all the stores. They pillaged it, they looted, they burnt. Not a word. The police were told to stay out of it. It was like the old-time pogroms. The Jews were being murdered, and the Tsar gave the order, police just disappear. Let the citizenry do what they want. It's unheard of. In the United States, this should happen. But it happened. These were the beginning of what we're talking about, that the Ramchal is speaking about here. This is all indicators of evil rearing its head. A country that was the model of law and order and decency and honesty and integrity and work ethic How does this happen in such a short time? The answer is when you erode, the base is eroded, everything starts falling apart, starts tottering and tilting, and everything spills out. They say the rat population in Manhattan, in the sewers, is staggering. God forbid, if these rodents would ever come out, they'd flood the city. You couldn't live in the city. Whatever's going to drive them out and bring them to the surface. In the subways, you used to see them running around by the third rail. What's going to cause this world to tip, and all that sewage is going to spill out, God forbid, which is called evil. This world is not going to be recognizable. Today, you can't recognize what a male is, what a female is. It's beyond comprehension that such a thing could happen to our society. And if you use certain words, you're condemned, you're even fired, and you could be attacked because not to be believed. I wonder when this start changing the gender of animals, male and female. There's a new movement. I'm being facetious, but I don't put anything past what's going on. God forbid. But all this is what we're talking about here. It's like God went to sleep. Kaviyachol. But there's a verse he quotes. Vayiketz Yoshin Hashem. He awakens from his sleep. Vayach Tzorov Ochor. And he will smite his enemy and beat them back. When God awakens and he re-enters into this existence and displays his might, all this is going to be destroyed. He will destroy with a vengeance. And ultimately, what's going to be the end? The end is going to be revealed that all the price we paid was to expunge that evil, to right and to re-secure existence, and that good should really have the upper hand. We're going to stop here. Just some comments, and we're going to continue tomorrow.